Richard Peterson strode through Hope Haven homeless shelter, barely noticing the worn carpet beneath his Italian leather shoes. Another Friday, another charity appearance. His secretary had scheduled this visit to boost his company's public image after the recent layoffs. Just 15 minutes, his PR team promised. Sign the check, shake some hands, let the photographers capture his generous spirit. The shelter's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across faces he tried not to study too closely. Success made him uncomfortable around failure. He'd worked too hard, climbed too high to be reminded of how easily it could all slip away. Then he saw her. Patricia sat on a thin cot in the corner, her designer clothes replaced by a faded sweater that hung loose on her frame. Her honey blonde hair, once perfectly styled, fell in unwashed strands around her face. But it was what she cradled in her arms that stopped his heart. A newborn baby, tiny and pink, wrapped in a donated blanket. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since their divorce. Since she'd disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only signed papers on his desk. She'd walked away from their marriage, her thriving art gallery, everything, without asking for a penny. The timing hit him like a physical blow. If she was holding a newborn, she must have been pregnant when she left. His world tilted on its axis. The woman who'd matched him drink for drink at business dinners, who'd built her gallery into the toast of the city's art scene, who'd never needed his money or connections, sat in a homeless shelter with their child. The baby stirred, tiny fingers reaching up to grasp Patricia's shirt. Richard's throat tightened at the familiar way the infant's nose crinkled, just like his did when he slept. "Mr. Peterson?" His assistant's voice seemed to come from far away. "The press is waiting." But Richard couldn't move. His expensive suit felt like armor, suffocating him. While he'd been signing billion-dollar deals in his penthouse office, his child had been born in a shelter. His ex-wife, the strongest woman he'd ever known, had fallen so far. Patricia's eyes finally met his. They held no warmth, no welcome. Only secrets. Dark ones that made his skin crawl. The sharp intelligence he'd always admired now held something else. Fear. What could make a woman like Patricia run? What could strip away everything she'd built? Who had she been running from? The baby began to cry, a thin wail that echoed through the shelter. Patricia instinctively shifted, shielding the infant from his view. From his presence. Like he was a threat. That small gesture shattered something in Richard's chest. His own child, hidden from him. Born into poverty while he'd added zeros to his bank account, too busy nursing his wounded pride to wonder why she'd left. 1 year of believing she'd simply grown cold, simply stopped loving him. 1 year of burying himself in work, telling himself he was better off alone. All lies. The truth sat before him on a shelter cot, written in his ex-wife's hollow cheeks and terrified eyes. In the newborn's tiny fists and delicate features that echoed his own. "Sir?" His assistant touched his arm. "The mayor is waiting." Richard shrugged off the hand. Politics, business, public relations, none of it mattered. His entire carefully constructed world had just crumbled to dust. His wife hadn't abandoned him. She'd run. And somehow, his billions hadn't been enough to keep her safe. The questions burned like acid in his throat. What had happened to the fearless woman he'd married? Who had destroyed her thriving business? Why hadn't she told him about their child? Most importantly, who had she been running from? The baby's cries grew louder. And Richard knew with bone-deep certainty that nothing in his life would ever be the same. The sun streamed through towering glass windows as Richard stood in his penthouse office, exactly 1 year earlier. His world was perfect then, or so he thought. The morning's business news played silently on wall-mounted screens, showing his company's soaring stock prices. He remembered every detail of that day. The Italian coffee cooling on his desk. The way his wedding ring caught the light as he signed acquisition papers. The sharp click of Patricia's heels on marble when she entered without knocking. She looked flawless, as always. Cream silk blouse, pearls at her throat, not a hair out of place. But something was off. Her face, usually warm with quiet confidence, was a carefully crafted mask. "I need you to sign these," she said, placing a manila envelope on his desk. "Divorce papers." No explanation. No anger. No tears. Just her signature, elegant and final, already dried on the dotted line. He'd been too shocked, too proud to ask why. Their marriage had been solid, or he'd thought it was. Sure, they'd been busy lately. He with his expanding empire, she with her gallery's growing success. But they'd always understood each other's drive. Supported each other's ambition. "If this is about the London deal," he started. "It's not." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Just sign, Richard. Please." He should have seen it then, the fear beneath her composure. The way her eyes darted to his office windows, checking the view of neighboring buildings. The slight bulge at her waist that wasn't there the week before. Instead, wounded pride took over. He signed without reading, handed back the papers, and turned to the skyline. "I'll have my lawyers contact yours." "No lawyers," she said quietly. "I don't want anything." That should have been his biggest clue. Patricia was brilliant with business, ruthless when necessary. She'd helped build his company alongside her own. Half of everything was rightfully hers. He heard her heels on marble again, walking away. When he finally turned back, she was gone. Within a week, her gallery closed its doors. Her phone was disconnected. Their shared friends hadn't heard a word. She'd vanished completely, leaving no trace. He'd told himself she'd planned it all, the gallery's sudden closure, the clean break, the disappearance. Easier to believe she'd grown cold than admit he'd missed something crucial. Some sign that his perfect wife was drowning. Now, standing in that shelter, watching her cradle their child, the truth hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so blind. So focused on his own pain that he'd missed the obvious. Patricia hadn't abandoned their marriage. She'd been running for her life. And somehow, despite all his power and resources, he'd failed to keep her safe. The baby's cry echoed through his memories, bringing him back to the present. One thing was crystal clear, he wouldn't fail them again. Richard sat in his private office at Peterson Technologies, staring at his computer screen. Something wasn't adding up about Patricia's gallery closure. The business had been thriving, packed openings, major sales, international collectors. Then overnight, it vanished. He pulled up old financial records, his fingers flying across the keyboard. As CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies, he had resources. It was time to use them. The first red flag appeared in the gallery's final month. Large wire transfers to offshore accounts. Equipment purchases that made no sense for an art gallery. Loan applications with forged signatures. "Get me everything on Patricia's gallery from last year," he barked into the intercom. Bank statements, contracts, security footage, all of it. His assistant rushed in with folders. "Sir, there's something else." The gallery's computer systems were breached multiple times that month. Professional job. They covered their tracks well. Richard's blood ran cold. He remembered Patricia's increasing paranoia in those final weeks. The new security cameras she'd installed. The way she'd jump when her phone rang. The files painted a clear picture. Someone had systematically destroyed her business. Drained accounts. Ruined her reputation with collectors. Created a paper trail of fraud that would have landed her in prison. But who? And why? His eyes caught a familiar name buried in the transactions. Anderson Global Partners. His company's biggest investor. Run by James Anderson, his best friend and business partner for 20 years. A conversation from that time floated back. James, commenting on Patricia's growing success, "She's becoming a liability, Rich. Too many connections in the art world. Too many wealthy clients who love to talk." He dismissed it then. Now, the words carried darker meaning. The baby's face flashed in his mind. His child, born in a shelter, because someone had wanted Patricia silenced. Because she'd known something. Something worth destroying her life over. Richard reached for his phone, then stopped. If James was behind this, he couldn't trust anyone. Not his staff. Not his security team. Not even his own company's systems. Patricia had run to protect their child. Now it was his turn to protect them both. But first, he needed proof. And he needed to move carefully. Because if James had done this once, he wouldn't hesitate to do it again. The sun set over the city skyline, cast. Patricia huddled in the shelter's small bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. Her hands shook as she recalled the past year's struggle. The baby, Riley, slept peacefully in a donated bassinet under the watchful eye of Maria, an elderly shelter resident she'd grown to trust. Seeing Richard today had shattered her carefully constructed walls. She'd spent months erasing her tracks, protecting their unborn child from a truth too dangerous to share. 9 months ago, she'd discovered something while organizing a private showing at her gallery. A painting, recently acquired from a European collector. X-rays for authentication revealed something hidden beneath the paint, documents. Financial records. Evidence of massive corporate fraud and money laundering through art purchases. She'd almost called Richard immediately. Then she saw the names. Anderson Global Partners. James Anderson. Richard's closest friend and business partner. That same night, the threats started. Photos of her daily routine. Messages about accidents that could happen to unborn children. A clear choice, disappear, or lose everything. She'd chosen her baby's safety over everything else. Watched as they systematically destroyed her business. Forged documents. Drained accounts. Used her gallery's reputation to launder millions. The pregnancy had been difficult. No prenatal care for months, afraid to risk using her real name at hospitals. Living off cash savings until they ran out. The shelter had been her last resort. Now Richard knew. She saw the recognition in his eyes when he looked at Riley. The same blue eyes, the same chin. Their child was living proof of the timeline, proof she hadn't simply abandoned him. But James Anderson had billions at stake. Access to Richard's company's resources. Eyes everywhere. Patricia dried her face with a paper towel, squaring her shoulders. She'd protected Riley this long. She wouldn't fail now. A commotion outside made her freeze. Voices. Footsteps. Patricia? Maria's urgent whisper, through the door. Men in suits. Asking questions. Her heart stopped. They'd found her. The bathroom window was small, but she'd mapped every escape route the day she arrived. She had to reach Riley. Had to run. Again. Richard stared at the security footage from his private investigation team. Dark figures entering Patricia's gallery after hours, mere days before she left. His hands clenched as he recognized one man's distinctive limp, James Anderson's head of security. He'd spent the day gathering evidence. Money trails. Deleted emails. Security logs. Each piece confirmed his worst fears. James had orchestrated everything. A sudden alert flashed on his screen. Active facial recognition match. Patricia, running from Hope Haven shelter. Men in black suits entering minutes before. His heart stopped. James must have surveillance on his movements. The shelter visit had exposed her. Richard grabbed his phone, punching in a number he hadn't used in years. Kevin? Remember that favor you owe me? I need your team. Now. Kevin had been his head of security before starting his own firm. The only person Richard still trusted. GPS tracking shows 3 vehicles pursuing a woman with infant, Kevin reported minutes later. They're heading toward the industrial district. Richard was already moving, taking the private elevator to his car. He'd failed Patricia once. Not again. His phone buzzed. A text from James: "Cleaning up your mess, old friend. Stay out of it." The pieces clicked. The European art deals. The laundered money. Patricia's gallery had been the perfect cover until she discovered something. Now she knew too much. Richard pressed the accelerator, praying he wasn't too late. This time, he would protect his family, no matter the cost. Patricia stumbled through the maze of abandoned warehouses, clutching Riley tightly. The baby, sensing her fear, remained eerily quiet. Footsteps echoed behind her, getting closer. A black SUV appeared at the end of the alley. Her heart sank, until she saw Richard behind the wheel. "Get in," he shouted. She hesitated for a split second. Trust had nearly destroyed them before. "I know about James," he said, eyes pleading. "I know what he did to your gallery. Please." The sound of running feet made her decision. She dove into the car, shielding Riley as Richard sped away. "There's a safe house," he said, taking sharp turns to lose their pursuers. "Kevin's team is waiting." "The documents," Patricia said between breaths. "In the painting. They prove everything. The money laundering, the threats, all of it. I have proof too. Bank records, security footage. James won't get away with this." Riley stirred, tiny hand reaching up. Richard glanced at their child for the first time, really seeing her. His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have known. Should have protected you both." Headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. James's men, closing in. Richard gripped the wheel tighter. This time, he wouldn't let his family slip away. They had evidence. They had each other. And most importantly, they had something worth fighting for. The chase was on. James Anderson paced in his penthouse office, fury etched on his face as he watched the security feeds. Richard and Patricia had escaped. Years of careful planning, unraveling in minutes. "Find them," he barked into his phone. "Use every resource we have." His empire was built on secrets. Art galleries, perfect for cleaning dirty money. Patricia had stumbled onto the truth, documents hidden in that cursed painting. If those records went public, everything would crumble. Meanwhile, Richard and Patricia arrived at Kevin's safe house, an unmarked building on the outskirts. Kevlar-vested security guards swept the perimeter. Inside, Riley slept peacefully in a makeshift nursery. "The painting's in a storage unit," Patricia explained, showing Richard the key. "Hidden in plain sight." "James won't stop," Richard said, studying surveillance monitors. "He has too much to lose." "So do we." Patricia touched Riley's cheek. Their daughter represented everything they'd nearly lost: trust, love, family. Kevin burst in. "Anderson's men found the storage facility. They're moving in." Richard and Patricia shared a look. One final choice: run and hide forever, or stand and fight. "Get me the district attorney," Richard commanded. "And our best security team." It was time to end this. Their daughter deserved a life without fear. The final battle was about to begin. Patricia and Richard crouched behind crates in the storage facility, watching Anderson's men search unit after unit. Their evidence, the painting that could destroy James's empire, sat just 20 feet away. "Security teams in position," Kevin whispered through their earpieces. "District Attorney's office is standing by." They'd planned this carefully. Police units hidden nearby. Federal agents monitoring every exit. One chance to end this. James himself strode in, flanked by guards. "I know you're here," his voice echoed. "Think about your daughter, Patricia. Is this worth risking her future?" Richard squeezed Patricia's hand. They thought of Riley, safe at Kevin's compound. Their daughter was exactly why they had to finish this. Patricia pressed a button on her phone. Storage unit doors began opening simultaneously, a trick from her gallery days. Confusion erupted as Anderson's men scattered, trying to check each unit. Richard activated the second phase. Lights went dark. Emergency exits sealed. In the chaos, Patricia slipped to their unit. The painting waited inside, its hidden documents intact. All the evidence they needed. James's angry shouts filled the darkness. Find them. Now. But it was too late. Police lights flooded the building. Federal agents swarmed in. James Anderson, a voice boomed. You're under arrest. As agents led James away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Richard. She made you weak, he spat. Richard held Patricia close, thinking of their daughter. No, he said. She made me strong. The truth was finally out. Their family was safe. And somewhere across town, a baby girl slept peacefully, unaware that her parents had just changed everything. It was time to go home.